Are we happy? Are we happy to appoint what Jeremy said? Yes? Any abstentions? Anyone against? So it's not Hannah Slater, it's the other one. So number 5 is we're going to receive from Ian the report of fabrics, goods and ornaments of the church and property in the parish, which is now 2 churches.
Thank you. I'm pleased to report to the APCM that the inventory, which is the report of all the fixtures, fittings, properties, records, everything. It used to be called a log and terrier. I still think that's a better name, but, you know, there we go. I'm pleased to say that the report for St. Paul's has been completed. I've signed it, and Mark will sign it in the next day or so, and there are no problems with that. There were 1 or 2 things I couldn't find when I went round looking, and I counted everything, and I'm hugely grateful to Toby, because if you don't know where something is or what's happened to it, Toby will know. And I think we do not know how much the organisation of this church on a day-to-day basis, just the moving of chairs and all that sort of practical stuff, how much of that we depend on Toby for. So can we just thank Toby? We found the inventory for St. Barnabas. I have to say, it probably hasn't been updated in a reasonable number of years. I have to say the diocese don't seem too worried about it, which they should have done, but there we go. We've talked to the diocese about how we do the inventory going forward, because we're now 2 buildings in 1 parish, and their suggestion is we keep the records separate, either as different sections within a combined inventory or 2 separate ones. They've also agreed we can start from scratch and redo the St. Barnabas one, which we have now started. And I'm thankful to PJ for giving us an inventory of the audio-visual equipment, because in both churches, the audio-visual equipment has been some of the biggest change of kit we've seen in the last year. That and the work that's been done in St. Barnabas around the kitchen and the entrance. So we'll have that done in the next few months. The only other thing to say is we've had quinquennial reviews in the last year or so on both buildings. Neither showed anything we weren't really aware of, and both of them are now being written into a maintenance plan and refurbishment. The actions from them will be put into the plan that gets fed into the 2025-26 budgeting round. So that's the work that's now going on. Thank you.
So before we go into our 2 main sections of the APCM, just another thing I forgot to mention, that Angela's stepping down from being our safeguarding officer, but we've got a new person who will be elected by PCC tonight, so we'll send an email out and elect her. But that's Sarah Ford. So Sarah Ford's our new safeguarding officer. Thanks so much, Sarah. It's lovely because Sarah used to be a church warden in St. Barnabas, now safeguarding officer for the whole parish. It's just sort of a beautiful thing of working together and becoming one. So that's really great. So now I'm going to hand over to Jeremy and John, who are going to share about the finances from last year.
Good evening, everyone. As it says up there, my name's Jeremy, and I'm the church treasurer. Can you roll the slide forward, Hannah, please? Thank you. One of my responsibilities is to oversee the production of the church accounts, and the 2023 accounts have been available on the website, and they've been in the foyer of both churches for a couple of weeks. I'd have to say it was a much more complicated process this year, bringing together the affairs of 2 charities in accounting terms. And as part of that process, we had to restate the 2022 figures. So those of you who read last year's and digested it from the St Paul's AGM probably won't recognise the 2022 figures, and that's the reason why. I should at this point thank those without whom we wouldn't have got the accounts completed, and that's Tina and Clive, who pulled together the stuff at St Barnabas in the period up to and including the end of August, and to Helen, our financial controller here at St Paul's. Their contributions have been invaluable. So thank you all. The other thing to say about the accounts, they do look complicated. They're not particularly easy to read and understand. They're good if you're having trouble sleeping, I guess. But apart from that, they are difficult. But they are prepared in accordance with the Charity Commission rules and something called the Charities Accounting Statement of Recommended Practice, which accountants will refer to as the SORP. But what I'm going to try and do now is to perhaps break those down a bit and make them a bit more understandable for you. Can you roll it on again? Thank you, Hannah. This slide summarises our income for 2023 for the two churches, and in total it was 939,000. The big thing to note here is that giving and gift aid combined add up to just under two-thirds of the total. I think it's and this is due to the generosity of church members. So thank you all very much. And I know John's going to speak in much more detail about giving in a few moments, so I won't dwell at great length on giving, other than to say gift aid is a particularly important part. So if anyone is a regular giver and is also a UK taxpayer, please sign up for gift aid, because if you do, the HMRC give us £2.50 back for every £10 that you donate. So it's a significant boost to our finances. So please think about that if you haven't already. The figures to the top left-hand corner of the chart, the 64,000 in grants were essentially one-off income. They were due to the great work done by Paul at St Barnabas, getting some money in from the NHS for the establishment of the drop-in centre, which we've used to refurbish the welcome area, and also the church revitalisation grant from the diocese, which is part funded some of the equipment that we've got at St Barnabas, and it's also funding now the community manager post. But that's one-off. And Little Fishes, as you'll see when we get on to expenditure, is very much self-financing. The income from parents and from the fees paid for the free 15 hours of care essentially offset the costs of running Little Fishes. So I think if we could roll on again, Hannah, please. And as you can see, we made a small surplus last year. The parish share is the money that goes to the diocese to help with the central costs of the diocese, the bishops, the training of clergy, the curates. The curate's salary is and the salary of all the curates in the diocese is paid from parish share. Our staff team, our buildings, between those two things take up approaching half of the total. And the other big area is our mission partners. The other expenditure of 125,000 is the sort of cost, the ministry costs and activities. There was a sum of other income for people who pay for courses and events. Some of that sum is the cost of running events. The other things that are in there: stationery, printing, finance costs, audit fees, payroll fees, and so on, and the rent of the curate's house in Epsom, or curate's flat in Epsom. Can we move on again, please? Thank you. On the balance sheet, we've got fixed assets of just over £750,000. The main items there are the two staff houses, 18 Nonsuch Walk and 19 Northey Avenue. And those and all the other fixed assets are on the balance sheet at historical cost, less accumulated depreciation. We don't revalue the houses. PCC did consider that a couple of years ago. We don't do so because they're occupied by members of staff. So that, effectively we're using them for key workers. Were we planning to use them for something else or to sell them on the open market, then it would be appropriate to get a valuation first. But for accounting purposes, there's no requirement to do so, and it doesn't actually help us greatly, and it would cost us money to get a professional valuation. So PCC has decided not to do that. In terms of current assets, most of the current assets is cash, which is held at the bank or on short-term deposit. PCC since the APCM in October, PCC has approved a number of finance policies. One of those is around banking, cash management, and investment, and all of our deposits are invested in accordance with that policy. Thanks, Hannah. The other thing, we've had a significant amount of capital spend this year, which has increased our fixed asset base. A chunk of that has been the work at St Barnabas, the refurbishment of the kitchen, the provision of new AV equipment there, and a lot of that, as we said earlier, was funded by grants. And we've also put new screens in the arena here, which I think most people would regard as a big improvement in terms of being able to see what's on the screen compared with what was there before, and those cost 20,700. Thanks, Hannah. Those who've read the accounts will notice that the church has significant reserves. I thought it'd be helpful just to explain why we need reserves. And the four reasons that are set out on the slide. It's possible that we might at some point have unexpected costs. We're running two large buildings. We've just had a quinquennial and 2 staff houses. Or there could be a downturn in our income for some reason. The second point, our income comes from giving of parishioners when parishioners give us the money. It doesn't all come in regular monthly instalments in the same way as many of our costs do. So we do need a buffer of cash to make sure that we can pay the staff and the other bills when they fall due, because our giving is people give when it meets their own personal financial circumstances, and that's the right and proper thing to do. So, but we do need a cash reservoir as a result of that. Not all of our reserves are cash backed. The way the accounts are pulled together, expenditure on fixed assets appears in the accounts as reserves. It's something called double entry bookkeeping for those who aren't accountants, and it's a complicated concept to understand. The cash-backed reserves is about 240,000, and if we move on to the next slide, we can see which ones those are. The largest one is the general fund balance, which is the general fund is our main operating account. The repairs and maintenance reserve, we set that aside a number of years ago from general fund in order to fund significant non-routine expenditure. Examples of that in recent years, we upgraded the fire alarm and emergency lighting systems. More recently we upgraded the boiler at the Cheam end of this building. So it's those types of things we would fund from the repairs and maintenance reserve. At the moment, as Ian highlighted, Hannah's working with Ian to build a planned maintenance program for the next few years, drawing on the information that we've just had in the quinquennial. So that will inform whether we need to adjust that reserve in any way, and also the demands on that reserve in the next couple of years. The 11,000 at St Barnabas is essentially what's left from the St Barnabas accounts when the old St Barnabas charity was wound up at the end of August. The restricted funds, the resource fund for youth and worship, we had a specific fundraising exercise a few years ago. That's now being used to fund the worship pastor's salary. And the Little Fishes Reserve is essentially a balance of fees in excess of operating costs for Little Fishes over a number of years. Little Fishes runs broadly at break even. The exact The exact position each year simply depends on the number of children we have and the mix of fees paid by parents and fees paid by Surrey County Council under the government scheme, because the latter is coming at a lower hourly rate than the former. So it's potentially we'll have more government funded money this year as the number of number of hours free nursing care increases. I mentioned finance policies. PCC approved the reserves policy in April, and we'll review this at least annually, but generally annually as part of the process for reviewing the accounts. Can we roll on again? Thanks, Hannah. I mentioned that some of the reserves are restricted. The restriction isn't put on reserves by PCC or by me or anybody else. The restrictions arise based on where the money's come from. Sometimes that can be the person who's given the money says, I'd like you to, I'm giving you this money, but I want you to spend it on something specific. Last year we had for example, we had a donation from somebody who wanted to provide the money for the catering of the Alpha courses, and so that money was ring-fenced for that particular purpose. We've recently had a donation which was specifically for CAP and for the work of CAP, and so that will be spent in that area. Sometimes we make a specific appeal, and the terms of that appeal mean we have a restricted fund. Often grant funding, such as the grants Paul got for us at St Barnabas, again have required to be used on specific things. And trading activities such as Little Fishes, the income is used to meet the costs of that activity. So that's why we have restricted funds. Thanks, Hannah. We've reappointed the auditors. I'd just say that we currently have an independent review. The Charities Commission's requirements are that for any charity with an income of more than 25,000 but less than £1 million is required to have an independent review. If our income were to move above that £1 million threshold, then we'd have to have a full audit, which would be a more onerous exercise and a more expensive one. But as we mentioned, Harmer Slater have carried out the review this year. We've reappointed them already, so we don't need to do that again. Helen and I were thinking that as we haven't done so for a few years, we ought to test the market in 2025. So we'll be planning to do that. Nico asked me if I could also give you a sort of an overview of the current year's budget, which perhaps might make our budget a little bit easier to understand, because it takes out those specific areas of funding, such as Little Fishes and the grants. And as you can see, our budget income for 2024 is £750,000, of which round about 94% will come from giving and gift aid. There's a relatively small amount for lettings, and then a very the 10,000 other is a mix of courses and activities. It's also there's some interest on our deposits in there as well. And finally one, Hannah, please, thank you. And this is our expenditure budget. It's so we've set a balanced budget for this year, or with a small surplus. Essentially, you can see on there, perhaps more clearly than on the other one, that you can categorise most of our expenditure into what I refer to as the 4 Ps: parish share, premises, people, and partners. And those are the percentages that we spend on those things. And as I described earlier what the other expenditure is. I think perhaps the biggest thing to highlight on here is the staff figure of 252,000. That's an understated figure now, partly because we've had some vacancies during this year, so there's some of the staff costs in there are only in for a part year. We've also got some external funding for two positions. The Youth and Worship Fund is funding the worship pastor. We will have used up all of that money by the end of March next year. And the church revitalisation grant at St Barnabas, which is funding the community manager, Again, that will have been fully spent at the end of this year, so we will have to fund both of those posts from our own income next year. So that 252 will effectively become 300,000, not because we've added extra staff, it's simply the full year effect of the staff who are already in post. And so we'll be having to look to close that gap in 25 or 26. That's it from me, thank you.
Very good evening to you all. Over the next few minutes, if we could have the next slide, please, my aim is to update you about how St Paul's fared financially in the past year. I know that Jeremy has said something about that, but I've got some comments on the operating budget rather than the report and accounts, which are slightly different. How we're doing so far this year, the latest giving analysis, the current year-end forecast, and an indication of some challenges ahead. But before I do that, I'd just like to thank you once again, and from this lectern for the last time, for your sacrificial giving as we've merged the two churches and faced new challenges. As always, your commitment and generosity are very much appreciated and have enabled us to emerge from the past few years' difficulties in a strong financial position. In 2023, pledged and planned giving plus gift aid totaled £670,000. So I'd just like to give you a short overview. I know Jeremy gave you the long overview, I'll give you the short overview. This analysis is based on 12 months of St Paul's figures and 4 months of St Barnabas figures, and it represents the operating budget. So some of the figures will differ, of course, from what Jeremy had presented. As he said, the expectation of a large deficit last year, it was 58,000 we were expecting as a deficit, was turned into a surplus of 22,000 due to increased giving, which was up 7%, and effective cost control, which ended the year £5,000 under budget. And gift aid contributed 112,000. As you've heard, we also maintained significant reserves. Just as a comparison, the year-end performance in 2022 was a deficit of £20,000. So we're going forward with a robust financial position, but we do face some new challenges. But before we get there, perhaps I can just update you on the January-April figures. How are we doing so far this year? The first 4 months show a surplus, £10,000 up on budget. Great news. Income's up £15,000. However, costs are up £5,000 in that period. The year-end forecast is currently for a small deficit of £3,500 against a budgeted £9,000 surplus. The main reason for this is the impact of planned changes in staffing and accommodation costs. This may, to some of you, be a familiar chart because I've been presenting it for the last 9 years and it goes back to 2011. It's not something you need to see all the figures and the details of the figures which are on the top of the columns. This will all be put up on the website after tonight's APCM. So if you want to look at the figures, you can see the detailed figures then. But it's a chart shows giving from 2011 to what we expect in 2024. Some years include giving connected with specific appeals, but in the past 2 years, as you look towards the end of the chart, you can see there's an upward trend which we expect to continue in 2024. The 2023 giving includes St Barnabas from September onwards, as I mentioned. This uptick follows a slump in the immediate post-COVID years. We are now on track for increased giving to fund the many initiatives and activities that we're undertaking both at St Paul's and St Barnabas. So, an update. Before the challenges, you can have an update. We're on schedule with the integration of the two churches' finances following the merger. This is a 2-year project, which is ending in 2025. Giving and the number of givers is increasing, and recent preaching on giving was most timely. Of 251 giving units, now a giving unit is either an individual or a family, 10 givers at St Paul's and St Barnabas contribute 20% of all giving income. 100 givers contribute 82%, excluding cash and unidentified giving. And this continues a trend of many years. However, to deliver our exciting vision for the new parish, this balance will need to shift. Costs are under control, but face increased pressure. And as I mentioned, the year-end forecast is a deficit as opposed to a surplus. So, what's the challenge ahead? Our finances are in a bust state, and as the end of April, general reserves totaled 181,000. Investment in staff and ministry and mission will only impact fully on costs next year. Additional costs next year could be as high as £36,000. These additional costs in 2025 could also impact adversely on 2026, so early budgeting is being made a top priority, so all the options can be assessed. Of course, increased spending will need to be covered either by more giving or by using some of our reserves. So I would suggest that 2025 will be a pivotal year for St Paul's and St Barnabas. So to conclude, my thanks to our Treasurer, Jeremy Randall, and our Financial Controller, Helen Bubb, for all of their support and their hard work as we've merged our two churches' finances. As I step down as Chair of Finance after 9 years, may I thank everyone in the church family who has given sacrificially over the years and more recently to enable us to thrive and grow. Thank you.
So now is the time to ask finance questions, but please, if it's very much a niche thing that you're very interested about and nobody else is, please don't ask a question, just grab them afterwards. If it's something more big picture that's relevant to everyone, I'm sorry, I'm not putting off questions, it's just let's try and ask questions that might be relevant to everyone. And one question came in earlier today, and it's a really good question. It says, when it comes to finance, why do we speak and share with fear? Why do we change our mindset and approach? How do we change our mindset and approach to not be fear-focused or fear-motivated? And I think I completely get where this question comes from, because a lot of the time when we are sharing finances, it's treasurers, accountants who are sharing, and what they give is they give us a very transparent picture of where we are and what's happening. And that's why it might feel like sometimes it's more risk-averse or more comes across as more fearful. But actually, I think how it's communicated is usually this is the picture, this is the reality, and then we step in faith and say, okay, God, let's go for it. Let's have dreams, let's have adventures, let's try things out. And last year we started with a budget that had a massive deficit. We ended up with a surplus. But I think how it's communicated by our finance team, in a way, it needs to be a real account of how things are, and then we pray into it, and then we step out in faith, and then God always shows up. And actually, as we are looking at sort of the budget for the rest of this year and next year, I was saying, let's put a bit of faith in there. Let's put a bit of not the worst-case scenario, but actually what we actually expect it to be, so that we have a very good picture of it. So in a way, I completely understand where this question comes from, but on the other hand, we also have to understand where sometimes the sharing of finances comes from as well. And I think we need both, don't we? We need to dream big and sort of go for it and take risks, but we also need some people to tell us, hey, look, wait, this costs a bit of money. Before you look at it, did you really kind of count what everything will cost? And we say yes, and then we go for it. And that's what we're doing, and that's why we've hired new people, and that's why we're going forward with a lot of things. But I just thought this is probably a question more for me to answer than John and Jeremy, who do an amazing job with our finances. Any other questions about finances for John and Jeremy? Yes. Thanks, Toby. Yeah.
Thank you. The presentation that Jeremy made referred to total income in the order of 950,000, something like that. I forget the full figure. The income and expenditure that John has referred to accounts for in the region of 750,000. Why is there a difference? And that's on the handout that we got.
Yeah, the reason is the figures John referred to is what we regard as the church operating budget, which is essentially the general fund budget, and that included the costs and income for St Paul's for 12 months, or actually St Paul's for 9 months, St Barnabas and St Paul's and St Barnabas for 3 months. So the first 9 months of St Barnabas income and expenditure weren't in the figures that John gave you because they were outside of the operating budget. The accounts, because we've brought two charities together, required us to pick up the St Barnabas income and expenditure as well. So those were included in the figures that I gave you. I also included in my figures Little Fish's income and expenditure because I quoted the figures from the Statement of Financial Activities, which is in the published accounts document. So it essentially not both figures are correct. We're looking at two different parts of the same picture.
So, for the financial year 2024, for the combined parish, in other words, from January this year to December, what will the total income and expenditure be? Well,
the budget figure were the figures on the last two slides, that's the operating budget. I stripped out Little Fishes because we always work on the basis that Little Fishes will have a balanced budget, and if the income or the expenditure are if one is slightly different from the other, that will be balanced using the Little Fishes Reserve, either a contribution to the Little Fishes Reserve or a contribution from. So, but if we added those in, we'd add about 85,000 to both sides, to both slides. But it didn't seem I talked to Nico about this, and we thought it'd be less confusing if we left Little Fishes out of those last two. So the last two slides are the 2024 budget.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy.
There's Graham and Tina behind. Oh, there's somebody over there as well.
Hello, not really relating to finances, but who is to replace John?
That's a great question. We're going to mention it in a while, but Andrew and Bianca are going to be our giving secretaries. I saw you somewhere. I don't know where you are now. There you are. So they'll do part of the role. So they'll do the role of the whole giving side and thanking people and helping people do that. But then Ian, as a church warden, will do the heading up the finance team and bringing that to PCC. So it's sort of split into three people doing different bits.
My question's about inflation. So John's giving chart for the last 14 years, if you take the pandemic out, is basically the same amount every year. Is that because we've got fewer giving units whose giving has kept pace with inflation, or the same number of giving units and our giving hasn't kept pace with inflation? Because all else being equal, we'd hope that chart would go up with inflation.
So I think that maybe I can answer that. During COVID 2021, the church lost at St. Paul's 30% of the people coming, So we're now sort of similar levels to that time, but obviously that means those people were stopped giving, the people who left, and the new people take a while to build up. So I think that's probably, that's my analysis. Maybe John's a bit different, but you have to remember that, like, even though now the church looks quite full, 2 years ago there was 150 less people, and that's quite a big dip. And that's why actually keeping, for that time, the income quite similar was actually maybe because people were giving more than they were before. Does that make sense?
Last year there was a huge turnaround in the figures, I think, between budget and actual. I haven't got them in front of me, but I think it went from minus 58 to plus 20 or something, which is nearly 70,000 plus thousand. I was disappointed not to see a comparison of actual to budget for 2023. I think John's slides partly addressed that there was 38,000 more income and maybe 5,000 changed on costs. But that still leaves that 30,000 gap. I wonder if he could tell us what that was, please.
I think there's as you mentioned, Tina, there've been a number of different moving parts last year. Certainly, one part of it was we didn't, there was an element of finger in the air stuff. We didn't really have a lot of detail to put figures in for St Barnabas. So there was an element of guesswork in the figures in the initial figures. John's highlighted already that there was significant additional giving, and also there was the benefit of some cost control and some cost savings. The third thing that happened, we had some significant staffing changes as well. So there was a reduction in staffing expenditure as well. For example, Sally left midway through the year as one example, and then one or two others. Actually, Chris left, so we had a gap between Chris leaving and Hannah arriving. So there were some staffing vacancies as well. So I think that's the other main reason. There's one over there, Toby.
Hi, thanks very much for the really clear presentations. I just have a question, I'm slightly curious. So many years ago in St Paul's, there was a sort of a principle that 30% of giving income would go to mission, and I think looking at the figures now, that's fallen quite a bit since then. So I just wonder whether there's a sort of a target for the mission proportion that aim to sort of have in the medium term, or whether it's just low just because there are just so many other pressures on the budget that's not sort of feasible to continue that historic sort of level. Thanks.
Do you want me to take a bit of this flack, shall we? Yes. Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I'm not surprised that that question came up after previous APCMs, where it's also been raised, which is a very good question. The idea that the policy that St Paul's, as it was then, St Paul's, St Barnabas now, would give 30% of its income to mission was discussed in considerable depth about 10 years ago, 8 years ago, and there was a whole discussion which went on for about 2 years about mission. And I think in that time, it was agreed that that was not necessarily the most effective way to proceed with mission, just to give 30%. And I think going way back in the history of the church, that 30% was for overseas mission only. So it's actually moved a great deal. I think the other part of this, so there hasn't been a massive downgrading deliberately of money spent on mission. I think what has happened is there's been a redefinition of what we actually are looking at in terms of mission. And I think I'd like you to speak about that, because I think that's close to your heart.
Yeah, because I think also my sense is sometimes there was this idea that we send a lot of money externally, but we also need to invest a lot on the mission here. So revitalizing St. Barnabas means we are going for, we had 2 clergy for the last year and a half working there, and that costs us a lot of money, generally as a parish, and doing like a CAP centre and going to schools, all of that requires money. So I think what we're investing in mission is probably similar, but what was changed is instead of outsourcing it only outside, saying, okay, we also need to invest here. And maybe from someone who comes from the other side of the world, I would say England's probably now one of the countries that most needs to be re-evangelized. So we need to invest as much in evangelizing England than we do Africa. Actually, maybe Africa is 10 times better than us at the moment. But I'm not saying that sort of to downplay world mission, because I think it's great, and actually being in the rich parts of the world, we need to give. But I think we need to look at mission as both things. I think that's probably shifted a bit, even much more before I arrived, but that sense of we need to invest in mission here, and revitalizing a church is part of it, and doing CAP and doing schoolwork and all of that is part of it. So I'm very aware of time, and we still have Paul and me to have to chat a bit, talk to you a bit. So I'd like to move us forward. If you've got any other questions for John and Jeremy, just grab them afterwards, send them an email. They're very happy to answer any of your questions, and they're great, and they know their stuff very well. Paul, would you like to come and share?
I have very strict instructions of how long I'm allowed to speak for, not to get too carried away. But as it's my last APCM here, this gives me great opportunity to talk a little bit about passing the baton back to you as 2 churches, as were, becoming one church of St. Paul's and St. Barnabas. We've already just heard a response to a finance question about how we perceive mission expenditure. And it's worth reminding ourselves of the challenge and the vision that we set ourselves around about 5 years ago, when, before COVID, we were sailing merrily across the seas, and we thought, well, what is the Lord calling us to do and to be? And at that time, we heard about the challenge and the plight of St. Barnabas, a church with a history of connecting and reaching out to some of the most challenging and needy communities in Epsom, that because of that calling and the finances of that church was faced with closure. And we said as a church, not on our watch. And we said, we will not allow this to happen. And it was you who said, let us join with St. Barnabas to see what we can do, to see what the Lord can lead us into. It was a very, in some ways, unlike St. Paul's kind of project. I remember many of you saying, so what's the plan, Paul? Where is this going to go? And I kept saying, well, I'm not really sure. But this is what I think the Lord is calling us to do. And so we embarked on this partnership. The plan to revitalize St. Barnabas Church, to step out in faith. And part of the vision for this was because we recognized, as we've just heard, that so often as a church at St. Paul's, we have said, we're passionate about mission, but we're going to pay for others to do it. We're going to give our money I have to say, that's wonderful and good, but the Lord calls us all to partake in the Great Commission, and we have struggled, and we had struggled historically, to be able to do that locally because of the diocesan controls that had been on us for many years. But here the Lord gave us this local opportunity to step out into Epsom, to help a church that was on the edge of being closed, to keep its mission and its doors open, to serve those in greatest need. So as I prepare to hand over the baton, I want to encourage you not just to think that this job is done and that there are some wonderful people here who I'll talk about in a moment who are doing amazing things. But they cannot continue by themselves because the need is great and the responsibility that we have of becoming one church remains. One church that meets in 2 locations. See, now we've got this amazing foundation down at St. Barnabas. We've got this amazing foundation of a building that is fit for mission. With a great kitchen and a hub and AV. The fabric is great, but the fabric doesn't in itself do anything if we don't have the people to connect with the wider community. And we've begun to see real signs of growth. We've seen Barneys on our Tuesday connect with families that started a few years ago with no one. Now connecting with 25 families regularly, with up to 70, 80 attending each week. We have Love Me, Love My Mind meeting there on a Monday, working with those who are struggling with their mental health. We have Sunnybank Trust there, working with those with mental disabilities each week. We have our CAP centre there. And one of the things that we struggled with in the past is we invested into CAP, but we couldn't connect with the local community that were wanting to access CAP because it was so difficult for people to come here. Now we have a CAP drop-in. We've just recently led a money management course down there. We have drop-ins down there, and we've begun to see those who Lucy's been working with come on a Sunday. That doesn't happen very often, but it's beginning to happen. And that is one of the challenges that we have, isn't it, as we look forward? It's how do we continue that work that we are doing through Monday to Friday? How does that link into what we're doing on Sunday? Because we're seeing actually the footfall that we see in St. Barnabas each week is far greater than what we see here in a far smaller building, as we have so many from the community who come in day by day. I want to give a few thanks. I see on my left here Clive and Anne, who are just from the first day have committed themselves to joining in with St. Barnabas. And the work that they have done has just been amazing and fantastic. They've gone on courses, foundation and ministry course. Clive has been an assistant warden. Anne has, I don't know what I would do without Anne keeping us running week by week. She is just amazing. And thank you, both of you, for all that you have done to enable the vision come to life. And as I see Sarah here, hand over her role from being church warden to being to being safeguarding officer for the whole parish. Isn't that, as Nico said, isn't that beautiful as we see what it means for us to becoming one church? And there are many others that I could thank and should thank, but all of them have taken the step of faith in this new adventure together. Two of our values here are authenticity and adventure. And this is what we see in the community of St. Barnabas. And I invite you to explore it for yourselves, to see what the Lord is doing, to see what the Lord is doing in the community, to see what the Lord is doing in the congregation. You know, on a Sunday morning, we have up to 20 from the carers and those with mental health, mental disabilities come, probably the most vulnerable people in our community. They come and they join in with us, and they do join in with the community. The way in which they join in with communion and in the worship is sometimes really humbling. Of course, it brings struggles and challenges as well. It is not easy. We feel vulnerable. We feel on the edge. And that is where we need you to help us and to support us and for you to begin to step out as well. What will it mean to grow as one church in 2 locations in this next season? And finally, as I come into land with 6 seconds to go, I wanted to say thank you for backing this vision that we've had together. Thank you for stepping out, but don't stop. Keep pressing in.
Thank you, Paul. I just want to share a bit of where we've been and where we're going. But I'm aware that you've been sitting down for an hour 20, so would you like to stand? Let's do a bit of stretching, because we don't want you to fall asleep. So stand as if we were going to worship, not only half of you, but stand, stretch a bit, and now you can sit down. So I'm going to share a bit of the journey and where we are and how we got here. And the main thing is looking back at least the last year and a half. I can just say, but the Lord is with us. But the Lord has been with us. Isn't it amazing to see how the finances have changed, how St. Barnabas is growing, St. Paul's is growing, new people coming to faith, people being healed. Like it's amazing just to see what God has been doing. And I want to share a bit of why we're doing what we're doing. And I shared this at least at St. Paul's a few weeks ago. But this is a trend in the Church of England. It's improving a bit after obviously the dip is 2020, but the attendance has gone down by 40% in the Sunday attendance, and the kids and youth have gone down by 48% in the last 13 years. It's getting better, but there is a bit of an issue with the church not engaging very well with communities, with the community, and especially with the next generations. So a few weeks ago I shared this verse, but I think this verse has journeyed with St. Paul's and St. Barnabas for forever. And it says, "We will not hide the great deeds of God from their descendants. We will tell the next generation the praiseworthy deeds of the Lord, his power, and the wonders he has done." And if you know me a bit, you know that my heart is for 2 things. One is to go deeper with God, and the other one is to connect with the people who don't come to church. And that, in a nutshell, is what I call revival. It's going deeper with God, really connecting with God, and going out for people to get to know who God is. So that's what we've been working on a lot as a church. And I shared this, and I put this slide because it's a slide I showed PCC, my first PCC. And it's Thank God we changed our branding and we now have like proper branding. But this was my first PCC. And this guy, John Tyson, says, there is hope. Each generation of believers is given an opportunity to tell the story of Jesus through the local church. God's presence among his people has always been his heart. God's vision was not only a building to belong in, but a people to walk among. And Bill Hybels said, the local church is the hope of the world. And the world has a massive need for Jesus, and we are responsible for our little patch, and we are going to do everything to bring God's presence in and to take it out. And that's the heart of who we are, and that's what we want to do. And that's why our verse for last year, can anyone remember our verse for last year? Habakkuk 3, 2, nobody knows it. And it says this, and because this is what God has done throughout the history of the world. This is what he does all the time, and this is what we want him to do with us. It says, Lord, I have heard of your fame. We know how great God is. I stand in awe of your deeds, Lord. Repeat them in our day, in our time, make them known. So that was the heart of last year's verse for the year. And this is what, again, old PowerPoint, this is what we talked about, what we would work with. So we worked with the PCC mainly and the staff more than anyone else on what was our vision, what was our strategy, our culture, and the structure we wanted. I looked back at this, I was like, oh, we talked about structure. I couldn't remember that. I couldn't remember strategy and culture. And we came up with an idea of what our strategy would be. It was prayer, formation, mission, which came down to this lovely, lovely phrase you can see there, being with Jesus, becoming like Jesus, and doing what Jesus did. Because, of course, at the center of everything we do is Jesus, and we are Jesus' church. And if we want to do the Jesus stuff, we need him. And if we want to offer something to the world, we can offer Jesus and nothing else. So at the heart of everything we want to do is Jesus. We want to follow Jesus and see where he takes us. And our culture is reflecting in our 5 values. Do we remember our 5 values? Pick up your hand if you remember the 5 values, our 5 values. Who can remember our 5 values? There's 2 people, I think, in the room that seem like you know. If you know 3 values, 3 of our values, can you pick up your hand? There we go. So our values are community, encouragement, authenticity, adventure, and joy. Because we are very aware that our culture is more important than our strategy. If we say this is our strategy, but then they come in and what they receive is a community that has no joy, no encouragement, so, oh, well, that's a great strategy, but I want to leave right now. And Peter Drucker says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So that's who we are, and that's who we've tried to become. And I think since we've written this and decided this as a church, I think we have become a bit more adventurous and a bit more joyful and a bit more encouraging. I think there's the traits of that are sort of starting to shine through, but this is who we want to become as a community. I'd love a person coming in to say, ooh, I love this church. It's full of joy and encouragement and adventure and authenticity, and there's a sense of family, community family. I'd love that to be the sense that people have when they come in. And it takes a while to shape our culture, but that's where we're going. And then we've worked a bit on our structure, which was a bit surprising when I looked back at that sort of PCC meeting in November. In our structure, we've decided to invest more in St. Barnabas, which has been great. As I mentioned before, the last year and a half, 2 of our 3 full-time clergy have been focused on St. Barnabas. And that's because we really want to work in Epsom, and we really want to revitalize the church and to be a place of connection. We've rethought our kids structure, mainly because our 2 amazing kids workers who are there, our kids pastors, Naomi and Karen, left. So we had to sort of think through how we'd restructure our kids. We've decided now to bring in a youth catalyst, someone who will support Amanda, because we realize that we've got a lot of young people, but we want to do more about sort of going out on mission and reaching out to young people who don't come to church. As I mentioned, we had a new worship pastor, and one of the things that's quite unseen is we've invested a lot in our pastoral care. Once we heard that Sally was leaving, Sally is a very pastoral person, we've trained, I think, 7 people did the pastoral course. Our pastoral team, like the official pastoral team, moved from being 4 or 5 to, how many do you have, Rosalind? 12 or 13? It's nearly double, trebled its size. And this is kind of more behind the scenes. So sometimes people, when we look at our structure, we don't realize it's of some of these things. So Rosalind has been coordinating a team, but there's some amazing people who are doing loads of pastoral work, sort of unseen heroes that are behind the scenes, looking after people, going to hospitals, visiting, journeying with people. I can see like Jane DeLiza there, our kind of superhero pastoral care. She visited so many people all the time, and nobody knows. And we don't need to know. We don't need to flash these lights. But there's things in our structure that happen and that we've invested a lot in that are probably unseen. But most of our training of volunteers investment has gone to pastoral care. So as we look at sort of everything that's happened, it's now time to look, okay, what's forward? And I shared this on Sunday here at the 10 o'clock, but I came across this article from The Spectator, which is not a Christian magazine. And this is what this guy writes. He says, the new atheists of the early 2000s, led by Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens, and Daniel Dennett, predicted an utopia founded upon science and reason once he had abandoned religion. But the best-selling books proved to be full of empty promises. All that our post-Christian society has delivered so far is confusion, a mental health crisis in the young, and the culture wars. It's not surprising, then, that a movement of new theists has sprung up. And if you look at the news and you look at what's happening, and even in our church, there's a whole new movement of people saying, okay, atheism didn't work. What's next? And they're looking at God and spirituality, and they're looking at other things. And that's really exciting. That's sort of the groundwork that God's doing in our culture to bring revival outside of what we can do. Like, we are going to pray and we're going to surrender, we're going to go ask God to move. But in the culture here in England, there's a bit of a shift, and people are now much more open to hear from God. And we're seeing actually people coming to faith. And we can talk about people coming to faith not only sort of 5 years ago, but this year I can kind of in my head, I have 3 people that I know have come to faith in our church. One of them came to, I'm not going to share all of them, but one of them came to our Christmas service. So one of our lovely parishioners decided she was going to invite her neighbors. She invited 4 or 5 neighbors who came to our Christmas services. And then one of them went to Alpha under the leadership of David, and he started coming to church. He's now doing Discipleship Explored. And he told me 2 weeks ago, outside of the service, hey, I wanted to chat with you. And he said, I'd love to get baptized. So we're looking at a date where he can come to service, get into water, and get baptized. And he has no background, Christian background at all. And that's what's exciting about what God is doing, isn't it? That it's not only about us. It's about us being filled by the Spirit and others being able to get to know how great God is. So as I was thinking of this, I was thinking of who do we want to be as a church? And I found these 2 pictures. There's one with a really nice tree with a bit of water around it, all very nice and tidy. And the other one's a river that's taking a lot of water. It's messy, but there's trees everywhere. There's life everywhere, and you can't control it, and you can't put it into a little box, but there's life everywhere. And as I was reflecting on today, I said, who do I want to be? Who do we want to be? I definitely want to be a river where we don't have control of everything. We don't know exactly what's happening, but God is in the midst, and there's life. And that's the picture we get in the Bible of what following Jesus is about. It's not about everything being structurally, orderly, organized. It's about the people of God jumping into a river and saying, well, God, where are you going to take us? And life springing out everywhere in quite unexpected places. I have no idea, like, how... I do know now how this person came to a Christmas service and now wants to get baptized. But if I hadn't spoken to them, you suddenly see a face there, and then you see a face coming and getting baptized. And that's what we want to be. That's who we want to be. That's the heart of who we want to become as a church. And so the question for us is, who do you want to be? Where would you like to be part of this? Do you want to jump into a river where you don't know where you're going and it's a bit messy? Or would you rather have a nice, organized garden with one tree and a bit of fruit in it? And hopefully it's a first. Hopefully you want to jump into a river. If not, maybe you're not in the right church. No, joking. Yeah, everyone's welcome. But we'd love you to jump into a river. We'd love you to jump into what God wants to do and let him have free reign in and between us. So just as we finish, I just wanted to share, this is a verse for our year. This is who we want to be. We want to be people who are hungry for God. And if we want to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do what Jesus did, if we want to live out a culture that's really encouraging and joyful and people want to be part of, then we need to thirst for God. And this is our verse for today, for the year. You, God, are my God. Earnestly I seek you. I thirst for you. My whole being longs for you in a dry and parched land where there is no water. And there's only one way of doing that. There's only one way of being a church that flows with the Spirit, and that's by surrendering. That's by saying, God, you can do what we can't do. God, here we are for you. So I'd like us to just spend a minute praying and just say, where you are, as you are, just say, Lord, I am here for you. If we're going to be a church that flows with the Spirit, then we need to surrender and let you be Lord. So let's just spend a minute in silence praying. Father, we've got great buildings, we've got great equipment, got great staff and great team of volunteers and leaders. We are just so privileged by everything we've got. Lord, but we have nothing to offer if we don't have you. If you're not in our midst, if you're not changing lives, if you're not bringing people to yourself, if you're not backing our preaching and our stepping out in faith by touching people's lives, we have nothing. So therefore, Lord, we just choose to surrender to you. We choose to lay down our crowns and our garments and everything that we have and leave them in your hands and say, Lord, we come empty-handed. We have nothing to offer without you. But come and do your work amongst us. Come and pour out your Spirit amongst us. Come and do what only you can do. Because you are the most fascinating thing we have to offer. And we don't want to offer anything other than you to the world around us. In Jesus' name, amen. So, a slight gear change from preachy mode to questions. Does anyone have any questions about the sort of ministry update and the direction of travel?
Hello. From St Barnabas, we've been blessed by having an enormous amount of help with all of the music and the worship, which has been lovely to have so many extra people coming. There's a slight but. We used to have quite a strong tradition of using quite a lot of different music, from Taizé chants to modern worship to the old hymns to everything. And that seems to have gone. We seem to be having a bit of a playlist of just 20 or 30 worship songs. And I just wondered if the new worship person was going to actually look into that, because that's something that we strongly are missing, particularly some of the older hymns. And it just feels like we're not using that beautiful old language that we used to have. And it would just be nice to have a little bit more variety. And I just wondered if the new worship person was going to look into that.
I think definitely. I think now that Paul's stepping down and we're looking at what St. Barnabas looks like, again, I think there's a time to refresh and rethink. So I think there's definitely scope to rethink that. I can't give you a concrete answer, but it's definitely something we will review as part of looking at what services at St. Barnabas look like. So yes, thank you. So there was a question that came in. I'm just going to read it out. This is basically at St. Paul's. We seem to have less communion services than we had in the past, and they tend to be a bit briefer, the amount of time we spend in communion. And the question is, how do we balance what is communion for more newcomers and people who have been in the church for a longer time? So this is I can give quite a long answer to this, but I'm guessing this is tailored to the 10 o'clock, because I don't think it has changed at the 6 o'clock, the pattern. So we used to have a family communion every month and a sort of grown-up communion once a month. I think when I came, I changed the pattern to family communion every 2 months, mainly because I am the father of 3 hyper kids, and I realized that holding, especially the communion was quite heavily liturgical for family communion. Holding 3 kids whilst we are doing something quite solemn was quite hard, and I recognized that other parents were in a similar place. So that's why we moved it from once every month to every 2 months. I think in the last 6 months, for different reasons, we've had to postpone 1 or 2, so it feels that we've been doing it less than what we actually sort of planned to do. And the fact that we're doing communion a bit shorter or different to how it used to be, that has more to do with the style. So one of the things that when I came to St. Paul's in the interview, I said, look, if you want me to come here, I think we need to shift that 10 o'clock service to be more contemporary and more engaging for the outsider. And that's one of the changes was how we do communion, and other changes had to do with music and other things. And I know change is always hard, and I know it's costly, and we don't tend to like change too much. And I'm very aware. So with the changes, what we also did was we brought in 2 new reflective communion services. So we had one this morning and have one on Sundays once a month to sort of bring that balance back. So if people like a more lengthy liturgical service of communion, we have that twice a month with hymns. And actually, I led today, this morning, and I realized how much I enjoy in that setting a longer communion, more liturgical, lots of the prayers. And in that setting, I really enjoyed the hymns. We were singing them with Ian, and we thought, these are really good hymns. But in that setting, I think it works well. But I don't really believe too much in a mix mash. I don't think it always works very well. And actually, in practice, it's meant that the 10 o'clock has moved from an average of 200 people to 300. So it has paid off. But I recognize that if you like more longer liturgical communion, we've lost that a bit. And it was a conscious choice. And that's why we brought the other service to say, well, actually, if you like that, then come to 10 o'clock, but once a month stay and do the 11:30, and you'll have the full for liturgy. But it was a conscious decision. I think in the last few months we've been thinking, well, there's certain elements of the liturgy which are really powerful. If you do it for people who are not used to it, the whole thing can become quite monotonous and boring and disengaging. But if you pick up one element for people who aren't used to it, then you can bring a bit of life. So that's why last Sunday, for instance, I brought the prayer after communion, which is a prayer I love. But if you do it by itself, it can be quite powerful. If you do it with the creed and the whole long sort of Ode and all of that, for people who aren't used to it, it can be a bit long and disengaging. But it was a conscious decision, and that's why we also brought in the other two services. And that's why, in a way, now we're trying to bring elements to it, but not to the whole thing. But yeah, that's the reason behind it. Any other questions?
It's a follow-up question, really. You said the congregation's gone from 200 to 300. And before that, you said about making it more contemporary for people from the outside. Do we know how many of those extra 100 are transfers as opposed to people who are coming from outside?
Yeah, it's very hard to know. So it's a mixture of transfers. We know of people who came to faith in the last year and a half. There's a family who got baptized who were sort of very, very much someone who had gone to church when they were teenagers and stopped when they're 16. So it is a bit of a balance. There is obviously many who come from a Christian background, but not from local churches. So we've got a few who've come maybe from Hillsong who are commuting quite far away, or people who are commuting to churches in Wimbledon or other places and now found a space here. So it's a bit of a mixture, but not so much, I think, people from local churches who moved from, I don't know, Christchurch, Epsom, or so it's more people who've moved from other denominations. So it is a mixture. It's very hard to know exactly who was fringy and who was more. We know probably very well those who weren't Christians at all, but then a lot of people who probably weren't going to church much and suddenly re-engaged.
Because it just seems that it's an important thing to try and understand, isn't it? Because if we're just pulling people from elsewhere, then that's not meeting what you said you were setting out to do.
Yeah. So what we want mainly is to attract non-Christians, but in the journey, especially if you say St. Barnabas, people who live in Epsom are commuting, they find a church that's attractive, they'll stay. And for us here at St. Paul's, it's also, we have good kids work and youth work, and you tend to attract people who are from churches that don't have that, and they want their kids to have peers, and which makes sense.
Yeah, I love the verse from Psalm 63. My whole being longs for you. I'm seeing the 10 o'clock service has been really invitational, really bringing people in, but I'm not seeing how those people who we're bringing in are going to be discipled, and so their whole being longs for Jesus, which is the aim. So I'm not seeing the connection of how we're going to then disciple them, and how life group and the rest of church life fits into that. So
there's a mixture, because those who have come from non-church backgrounds tend to do Alpha and Discipleship Explored, and we've had quite big numbers actually in those two courses. And some of them come into life group, but it takes a while. So it's usually, especially if they have young kids, they probably find it a bit harder. But we have had people come in and start going to life group, and loads coming to Alpha and Discipleship Explored. And obviously the next step after that is for them to do life group. But I think it's probably more than we realize going through these courses. Because we don't see them, we don't go to courses. But yeah, that's obviously that's the pathway. It's Alpha, Explored, like Discipleship Explored Life Group. That's the journey we want people to go through. Any other questions? Yes.
Hello. Very similar to what this delightful woman to my right said. And you might think we planned this before, but we didn't. We were actually having an argument beforehand about theological stuff. So, how are we going deeper? And I was thinking of this question, and the words dry bones came to my head, and I was reading Ezekiel 37. And I know this sounds really extreme, but like on a Sunday morning, can our church be called a church of dry bones? Rather than living bodies that are going for just wanting to be in the presence of Jesus. And how are we growing our community of the body of Christ to be wholeheartedly focused on Jesus? Last week we had a prophetic prayer meeting, and of the 516 people, what it said on the piece of paper, only, I think there was 27 people there. I was like, oh, so great. So 27 people of our community want to actually spend time taking out of their week to pray for our church, to listen and get pictures and visions for our church, as well as then pray for one another. I was like, it's a bit disappointing. So how are we growing deeper in faith? How are we encouraging people? And that's not just a leadership thing, that's a whole body of Christ thing. How are we coming together to do that? And I think in that, then everything else becomes easier. Giving will become easier, or budgeting will become easier, because guess what? People are just going, I want to support this kingdom. I want to support the kingdom of God. So they won't just feel, I need to do it because I've been told to. Serving will go up because people are going, I want to be like Jesus and serve people. Encouragement will go up, joy will go up. So how do we do that?
So I think it's a mixture of things. Obviously, we teach it and we live it out, and we try to encourage one another in that. I think we can't measure things by a prophetic prayer meeting, because that's, in a way, it's a bit niche. So some people see that and think like, oh, I don't really want to get involved with this, but go to life group every week. Or we've got another 2 prayer groups who meet in the week, who are sort of people who can meet on a Tuesday or Friday, and then they're meeting then, and therefore they don't come to an evening meeting. So I would say that's not probably a good way of testing the temperature. Or loads of people now, out of the 100, loads of them have young kids and coming out at 8 o'clock, even though you can be super passionate for God, it's quite hard to come out. And therefore, I wouldn't say one prayer meeting can be the thermostat for how things are going, or how deep people are going in their faith. Because if you look at sort of Kingdom Come, which is our termly prayer meeting, you do get 100 people there. So it's a different way of measuring. I think what we do want to do is pray into going deeper, and hopefully that's contagious. And I think it has been quite contagious to see more people trying to listen to God, to go deeper, to join Bible groups. So it's really hard to measure, because someone can be super passionate for God, but actually not come to lots of things because they've got other concerns. But I think the drive is to go deeper, and that's why next time we're going to talk about revival. That's why we moved from one prayer meeting a term to once a month, and created new other prayer meetings in the week for people who can't come in the evening. So we're moving definitely in that direction, but at the end of the day, it's firstly up to each person, and up to us as a whole community to encourage one another to go deeper. And maybe going deeper looks different for different people. So for some people, it's more, I'm going to commit to going to our life group every week. And for other people, it's going more to prayer meetings. And so I would say it looks different for different people. Or some people be like, I'm going to serve once a week in my scouts group and share the gospel there, and I can't come there for another evening to a prayer meeting. But I'm still very passionately following Jesus. I think it just looks different for different people. But we definitely, that's what we're trying to do. I think if you ask me what would be my goal for the last year and a half, is I want to encourage people to go deeper, to get enthused, excited about what God is doing. And obviously it's a journey. but we want to go deeper and deeper. So, yeah, we've got two questions. And I think then we've got Roger and Alice, and then we might probably have to call it a day and then ask me any questions or Paul any questions afterwards.
Concern after looking at the website many times, apart from the address is completely too long, and we're in Sutton, Surrey, not Cheam, it's Sutton, Epsom, Surrey. This first point on Google search. I did mention this to Hannah a couple of times. But the other main concern is the staffing, according to the website. So what's happening about those who have moved on and those who are filling in the gaps? Who are they? When is recruitment happening for those who is stated as vacant? Again, there's the costings as well coming to there. Because a lot of people have left. So out of the security team and as well as the general core running on the church main team. The children, certainly, because we've lost now, Naomi's moved on, a couple of others have moved on. Who's filling their gap? What is the workload majority because of the work with children, young people in young families for now joint parish and also extending for this parish here at this church? Yeah. So there's several questions in there.
There is, yeah. So I think that with the website, I'd say it's a bit of a detail. You can chat with Hannah, but I think we can look into the sort of how to advertise it more on Google. With regards to staffing, yes, we've had a few vacancies, and generally people have stepped up. Alicia has done a great job kind of holding a bit more than she used to until we wait till Adam comes and joins us in September. The good news is we've sort of covered our sort of all our vacancies other than the youth catalyst, which we are interviewing in June. So generally, I think that's a sign of God being amazing, is that we have been able to cover lots of vacancies with some great people. So even though we've missed, and I think we're feeling the gap now quite a bit, I think we've been able to fill every position, and that's really exciting, actually, to see God's faithfulness in the people he's brought through, which is really good. Alice?
Yeah, it's just more of a comment, really. I just wanted to say that I think it's been really wonderful to see and hear, the fact that we need a new youth catalyst, or I don't even know what that is, Nico, but it sounds like we need more help with our youth, and I think that's a wonderful position to be in. I also want to say that as a young family with 3 young children coming on a Sunday morning, I do feel like the culture of the church has changed. It's so lovely to come here and not be really worried that my children might step out of line, and also to really feel the Holy Spirit working in this church. And I do feel that on a Sunday morning, I have really experienced that in the last, I don't know, since you've started being here, Nico, I really have experienced and felt the Holy Spirit in our church and felt it moving, and I think that is just wonderful. And I just wanted to give a comment of positivity and say how great it is to see those things developing, to see the youth work developing, the children's work, and to also see our youth trainee, Alicia, like how much she has done and developed and how great she is in that and our different people. So I think we're doing some really great work as well.
Brilliant. That's a good way to finish. Thank you, Alice. So we're going to close with a song. We're going to worship God together and with one of my favorite old hymns. So let's stand up and worship God together. And with that, we'll finish our meeting. Thanks so much for coming tonight.
I did think this was a good song choice after a couple of the questions, but yeah, let's give it to God just as we go out tonight. We're going to sing "Be Thou My Vision."
God be
when victory is won. May I reach heaven's joy, oh bright heaven's sun. Heart of my own heart, whatever before. Still be my vision, oh ruler of all.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening. Thanks for bearing with us. It's been 2 hours. I thought it was going to be an hour and a half. But it's good news. It's good to share what God is doing amongst us. Good to celebrate and good to know. We want to be completely transparent and journey together and do this together. So thanks for being a part of this. Shall we pray? Jesus, I pray that the peace that passes all understanding will keep our hearts and our minds in the knowledge and love of you. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit will be with us and remain with us always. Amen. Have a great evening.